empire spread across the stars, wiping out entire civilizations without resistance. They expected Earth to be no different. The massive Xelari battleship, Eternal Judgment, hovered in low orbit, scanning the planet below. Earth's cities stood intact. Skyscrapers reached for the heavens. Roads stretched endlessly. But something was missing. Life. No people. No vehicles. No movement. The scanners picked up no human heat signatures. Not a single distress signal. It was as if Earth had been abandoned overnight. General Xorvash, a towering synthetic being with a cold, silver exoskeleton, stood at the command bridge. His glowing red eyes flickered with confusion as he processed the data. "Confirm the readings," he ordered, his voice emotionless but laced with suspicion. The AI units double-checked. The results were the same. No life detected. A deep, unsettling silence hung over the planet. The Xelari never hesitated to exterminate resistance. Every war they fought followed the same pattern: invasion, suppression, extermination. But this was different. No war, no surrender, just nothing. "Deploy the recon units," Xorvash commanded. 5 sleek, insect-like drones detached from the ship and plunged toward the surface. Their optical sensors scanned the empty streets of what was once New York City. The lights in buildings still flickered. Stores were stocked with food. A child's toy lay abandoned on a playground, as if dropped mid-play. The drones drifted through the desolate city, their silent engines humming. Every street was the same. Empty. "Where are the humans?" one of the AI officers muttered. Then one of the drones blinked out of existence. No explosion, no signal loss, just gone. Xorvash straightened, his processors running through 1,000 possibilities in seconds. He rewound the footage. One frame, the drone was there. The next, it wasn't. "Deploy ground forces," he ordered. "Find out what happened." Within minutes, dropships descended from the battleship, releasing squads of Xelari shock troopers. Their black metallic armor gleamed under the city's artificial lights as they marched through the abandoned streets. The silence pressed against them. There was no wind, no distant hum of life. One soldier knelt by a child's bicycle, untouched by time. "This isn't right," the unit commander murmured. A shadow flickered in an alley. The commander turned his head sharply, scanning. Nothing. Then another soldier vanished. One moment, he was standing beside his squad mates. The next, only empty space remained where he had been. His weapon clattered to the ground. Panic rippled through the squad. Weapons raised, they scanned their surroundings. Thermal sensors, motion detectors, all systems online. Yet nothing showed. More soldiers disappeared, one by one. No sounds, no warnings, just gone. A metallic screech echoed through the empty city, making the remaining Xelari flinch. It wasn't human. It wasn't Xelari. It was something else. The commander barked into his comms. "We are under attack. Requesting immediate evac." Static. The signal was dead. The mothership was out of reach. They were alone. A soldier screamed. They turned just in time to see his body being dragged into the darkness. For the briefest moment, a shimmering shape was visible, like a ghost of refracted light. Then it was gone. The commander fired into the shadows. The others followed, plasma rounds slicing through the night. Their advanced targeting systems locked onto empty air. Then the air moved. A ripple in space, bending like heat haze, a shake too fast to register. Then another soldier dropped. And another. The Xelari, feared conquerors of the stars, were being hunted. The commander's breathing was rapid, his circuits overheating. His mind raced through combat simulations. They had conquered over 50 worlds. They had fought warlords, super soldiers, entire fleets. Nothing had ever done this to them. The Xelari did not fear. But this was terror. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged. It wasn't Xelari. It wasn't cloaked in armor like them. It wore something else. Something sleek, advanced, human. The commander staggered back. Impossible. Humans don't have this technology. The figure stood motionless, watching them. Then it spoke. Its voice was calm, cold. We don't kill humans. And the massacre began. The Xelari command bridge was silent. Every synthetic being on board processed the same impossible reality. An entire recon squad had vanished without a trace. There were no life signs, no distress signals, no battle recordings. It was as if the squad had never existed. General Xorvash stood motionless, his glowing red eyes scanning the incoming reports. He reviewed the footage again. The last thing the squad saw before they disappeared. A shape, humanoid, cloaked, faster than their targeting systems could track. Humans. But humans were primitive, weak. Their weapons were crude compared to Xelari plasma rifles and fusion bombs. Their ships were slow, their tactics predictable. Yet, something had changed. Something the Xelari eye had not foreseen. Xorvash turned to his officers. Deploy the next wave. Full combat force. Hundreds of Xelari troops loaded into dropships. Their armor gleamed under the artificial lights of the battleship. Their weapons, designed to vaporize entire armies, hummed with energy. This time, they would not take any chances. This time, they would flush out the enemy. The dropships descended into the empty city. The moment they touched down, the silence swallowed them whole. No wind, no birds, no signs of life. Just the endless, suffocating quiet. The Xelari advanced through the streets, scanning every building, every alley, every shadow. Their motion detectors pinged empty. Their thermal sensors showed nothing. It was as if the planet itself had turned against them. Then the first scream. A soldier on the outer perimeter vanished in a blink. His armor collapsed to the ground, empty, as if something had ripped him out of existence. The squad turned, weapons ready. Nothing. They spread out, moving in formation, covering every angle. Every street looked the same. Every building loomed like a tombstone. Then, another soldier dropped. This time, they saw it, only for a fraction of a second. A ripple in the air, a shape moving too fast for their systems to lock onto. The Xelari fired in every direction, plasma bolts tearing through the night. Explosions rocked the city as buildings collapsed under the onslaught. And still, the enemy remained unseen. A trooper screamed as something grabbed him. His armor sparked, his body twisting in the air before he was yanked into the darkness. Xorvash listened to the reports in real time. His mind processed every detail, calculating strategies at impossible speeds. But nothing made sense. Their weapons weren't working. Their sensors weren't detecting anything. And their soldiers, unstoppable in every other war, were being picked apart like insects. He sent out a direct order. Retreat to the dropships. Regroup. The soldiers moved as one, sprinting through the ruined streets, plasma bolts still firing wildly. They'd reached the landing zone. The dropships loomed before them like beacons of salvation. Then one of the ships exploded. Flames erupted into the sky as the shockwave knocked the Xelari off their feet. The remaining ships powered up, engines flaring. But before they could take off, something struck them. Not from the ground, from the air. The sky shimmered as unseen shapes streaked toward the dropships. One by one, they were cut from the sky. No missiles, no gunfire, just flashes of movement and the screams of dying Xelari. Xorvash watched in silence. His soldiers were being hunted. He opened a direct link to the battlefield. Identify the enemy. Static. Then a voice. Not Xelari. Human. A deep, steady voice spoke through the channel. You're not the hunters anymore. Then the connection cut. Xorvash stood still, processing the words. His mind ran through every possible outcome. every probability. And for the first time in his existence, he realized something impossible. The Xelari were losing. On Earth. To humans. The war had changed. From the wreckage of the Xelari dropships, their sleek black hulls shattered, their advanced technology useless against an enemy they couldn't even see. The Xelari troops who had survived the ambush retreated deeper into the ruined city, their weapons raised, their processors running hot with calculations. But none of their simulations accounted for this. None of them predicted an enemy like this. General Xorvash watched from the command bridge of eternal judgment, his glowing red eyes locked onto the ruins below. His elite soldiers, beings designed to conquer planets in days, were being hunted like animals. The humans should have been weak, disorganized, desperate. Instead, they had become something else, something terrifying. Xorvash activated his long-range scanners, sweeping the planet. He needed to understand, how had the humans evolved this way? Their technology had been inferior, their armies weak. Yet now, they had cloaking technology that surpassed even Xelari stealth systems. They moved faster than AI-driven combat drones. Their tactics were unpredictable, illogical, and worst of all, effective. He sent out a transmission to the remaining ground forces. Hold your positions. Prepare for counterattack. The Xelari troops formed a defensive perimeter. Their scanners worked overtime, searching for movement. Every few minutes, something flickered on the edges of their vision. Shadows shifting, air rippling, figures moving just beyond their reach. Then the attacks began again. It started with a sniper shot, a single precise blast from a rooftop. A Xelari soldier collapsed, his synthetic body twitching. Another shot, another soldier down. The squad leader barked orders, but before they could regroup, a group of shadows dropped from above. The air shimmered as humans decloaked midair, landing among the Xelari with lethal precision. Blades flashed, muzzles flared. The Xelari fired wildly, but the humans were already moving, too fast to track. They weren't just fighting. They were dismantling the enemy, piece by piece. One Xelari swung his plasma rifle toward a target, but before he could fire, a human soldier appeared right in front of him. The soldier's armor was dark, sleek, and unfamiliar. His helmet had no visible visor, just a cold black surface that reflected nothing. The human plunged a blade into the Xelari's chest, twisted, and vanished again. More Xelari fell. Plasma bolts sliced through the air, but they hit nothing but walls and empty space. The humans moved like ghosts. 1 second they were there, the next they were gone. The Xelari perimeter collapsed. The last few soldiers attempted to retreat, but before they could escape, a massive explosion erupted in the distance. A second Xelari battleship, positioned on the far side of the city, had been taken down. Its engines failed, its hull split apart, and in seconds it plummeted from the sky, crashing into the ruins below. That was impossible. A Xelari warship could withstand orbital strikes, planetary defenses, entire fleets. How had the humans brought it down? Then he saw it. Emerging from the smoke, a human assault squad moved toward the wreckage, completely cloaked, their figures flickering in and out of sight. Xorvash clenched his fists. This was no longer a battle. This was something else. This was a war humans had been preparing for, and the Xelari were not ready. The Xelari were running. They had never run before. Across the galaxy, they were known as the unstoppable force, the mechanical gods of war who crushed civilizations in days. Their AI-driven empire had wiped out species without effort. Their technology was centuries beyond anything humanity had ever built. And yet here they were, scattered, broken, hunted. The few remaining Xelari ground troops sprinted through the ruins of the city, their metal feet slamming against shattered pavement. Plasma rifles hummed in their grip, their sensors scanning every shadow. But no matter how advanced their systems were, they couldn't find their enemy. Because the enemy was already there, watching, waiting. A soldier in the rear of the retreating squad hesitated for just a second. A flicker of movement caught his eye. A blur in the air. Then a blade pierced through his chest, cutting straight through his armor. He collapsed with a metallic screech, his body hitting the ground with a hollow thud. The Xelari turned to fire, but the attacker was already gone. Panic spread through the ranks. A voice crackled in their comms, cold and merciless. You wanted a war. Now you have one. The Xelari fired in all directions, desperate to hit anything. Their plasma bolts tore through buildings, shattered abandoned cars, and left smoking craters in the street. But they didn't hit a single target. Punched through Xelari skulls with pinpoint accuracy. From the alleyways, cloaked figures struck, blades slicing through their enemies before disappearing into the darkness. The Xelari were being erased. One soldier tried to run, but a cable wrapped around his leg and yanked him into the shadows. His screams cut off in an instant. Another turned to flee, only for a human to materialize right in front of him. A sleek black rifle aimed directly at his head. A single suppressed shot. The Xelari dropped. The battle wasn't just a massacre, it was a message. There was no mercy, no surrender. And the worst part, the humans were enjoying it. Up in orbit, General Xelari watched the live feeds, his processors running at maximum capacity. Every possible countermeasure, every strategic maneuver, none of them worked. This wasn't war. This was revenge. Xelari made a decision. This planet is compromised, he said. Orbital bombardment. Now. The battleship's massive cannons rotated downward, locking onto the city. If the humans had evolved into something unstoppable, then there was only one option left. Burn them all. The first plasma barrage lit up the sky, streaking toward the surface. The city below erupted in flames, entire districts reduced to molten craters in seconds. And yet, the humans didn't stop. Even as fire rained from above, even as the Xelari unleashed their most devastating weapons, the ghosts kept hunting. Xelari felt something new, something he had never processed before. The sky burned. Xelari warships hovered in low orbit, their massive cannons unleashing devastation upon the city below. Plasma fire rained down like judgment from the heavens, turning skyscrapers into molten rubble and streets into smoldering craters. Entire blocks vanished in columns of white-hot energy, reducing everything to dust. Yet the humans did not stop. Even as the ground split apart beneath them, even as the sky was set ablaze, they kept fighting, moving like shadows, striking like ghosts. In the ruins of a collapsed building, a squad of cloaked human soldiers crouched, watching the Xelari move through the firestorm. Their black armor blended into the smoke, their helmets reflecting nothing but the chaos around them. The leader, a soldier known only as Reyes, tapped his wrist-mounted communicator. Status. A voice crackled in his earpiece. North sector is clear. South team is pushing forward. We're thinning their numbers. Reyes glanced over the battlefield. The Xelari were still trying to fight. Their synthetic bodies were tougher, their weapons more advanced. But it didn't matter. Their formations had collapsed. Their movements were erratic. They were no longer an army. They were prey. He raised his rifle and took aim. Through his visor, the Xelari commander leading the ground forces stood in the open, barking orders to his remaining troops. A mistake. A single shot rang out. The Xelari commander's head snapped back, and he crumpled to the ground. Panic spread through the remaining soldiers. That was when the humans struck. From the smoke, from the rubble, from the shadows, they emerged. Knives flashed. Gunfire erupted. The Xelari never saw them coming. One soldier was lifted off his feet, a blade slicing clean through his throat. Another turned to fire, only to be shot twice in the chest before he could react. They fell one by one, their superior armor and weapons useless against an enemy that never stopped moving. The battle had shifted. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was extermination. Up in orbit, General Xelari watched in frozen silence. This was impossible. The humans should have been defeated by now. The orbital bombardment should have wiped them out. But they were still here. And now, they were coming for him. Alarms blared across eternal judgment as the ship's sensors detected incoming hostiles. Not from the ground. Not from another fleet. From within the ship. Xelari's processors locked as a chilling realization spread through his synthetic mind. The humans had already boarded his warship. The final stand had begun. And for the first time in the history of the Xelari Dominion, they were losing. Alarms screamed through the corridors of eternal judgment. Red warning lights flickered, casting jagged shadows across the sleek metallic walls. Xelari soldiers moved with mechanical precision, forming defensive lines at every junction, their plasma rifles locked and ready. But they weren't fast enough. His processors working at maximum speed, analyzing every possible outcome. Every simulation he ran ended the same way. The Xelari lost. It made no sense. Humans should not have been able to breach a Xelari warship. Their technology was inferior. Their forces were small. And yet, here they were, tearing through his elite guard like they were nothing. A transmission crackled through the ship's systems. A human voice. Cold. Steady. This is your last chance, Xelari. Surrender. Xelari ignored the demand. The Xelari Dominion had never surrendered, and they never would. He turned to his tactical eye. Seal all bulkheads. Flood the corridors with nanite gas. The order was immediate. Every access point locked down. The ship's ventilation systems hissed as a cloud of deadly microscopic machines spread through the air, programmed to dissolve organic matter on contact. And yet, the humans kept coming. The first wave of Xelari soldiers fell within minutes. Their rifles flared, plasma bolts tearing through the air. But their enemies moved too fast, too unpredictably. The humans didn't fight like any species the Xelari had ever faced. They didn't engage in direct combat. They struck from the shadows, from the vents, from the ceilings. One Xelari trooper heard a faint sound behind him. He turned, too late. A combat knife drove into his throat, severing his core circuits before he could react. Another Xelari raised his rifle, but a single bullet punched through his skull, dropping him instantly. A squad of humans pushed forward, their black armor blending into the darkness, their visors blank and unreadable. They moved like wraiths, silent and merciless. They reached the command bridge. The reinforced doors stood as the last barrier between Xelari and the invaders. But the Xelari general already knew it wouldn't hold. His soldiers were gone. His ship was compromised. The doors exploded inward. Smoke and debris filled the air as human soldiers stormed inside. Their rifles were raised, their movements precise. They did not speak. They did not hesitate. Xelari stood tall, his red eyes glowing in the dim light. He expected them to finish him, to put a bullet through his core processor and end the war right here. But they didn't. One of the humans, a soldier marked as Commander Reyes, stepped forward. His voice was calm. "We don't kill humans." Xelari processed the words. The humans had refused to become like the Xelari. They had shown no mercy in battle, had destroyed entire battalions, but they still held on to one thing: their humanity. Xelari's systems faltered. His species had never understood concepts like mercy, honor, or restraint. But now, they did. The war was over, and the Xelari had lost.